"Oh my God, Phoebe, what have you done?" shouted Principal Miller, standing over the unconscious body of the football team captain, Brad Collins, who lay in the middle of the school hallway. I didn't mean to. He just grabbed me and I," stammered Phoebe Harrison, her massive hands still trembling from adrenaline. "Call an ambulance, right now." The principal grabbed the phone as a crowd of students gathered around, phones at the ready. "Phoebe, what happened to your face?" her best friend Madison whispered, noticing the strange expression of absolute determination in the eyes of the girl everyone thought was quiet and harmless. "I'm tired of hiding, Maddie. Tired of pretending to be weak. The best part is yet to come. Stay with us to find out how it all ended. But for now, like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out." 12 hours ago. Phoebe Harrison woke up in her small bedroom in a house on Maple Street in the town of Riverdale, Oregon, with the same feeling of impending disaster that had haunted her for 3 months straight. At 17, she weighed 140 kilograms, and every morning began with the painful ritual of picking out clothes that somewhat concealed her figure. But today was special. Today marked exactly 1 year since her younger sister Emily had died. The family never spoke of it, but Phoebe knew the truth. Emily had taken her own life due to bullying at the same school where Phoebe now attended. The same hallways, the same teachers who turned a blind eye to the torment. And worst of all, it was some of the same students who had driven Emily to despair. Phoebe's mother, Susan Harrison, sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and red, tear-stained eyes. Every October 1st, she woke up at 4 in the morning and simply cried until dawn. Her father, Michael, had already left for work at the auto shop. He couldn't bear this day and always found an excuse to escape the house. "Mom, are you okay?" Phoebe hugged her mother's shoulders, feeling her own heart break over and over again. I just think about what I could have done differently," Susan whispered, leaning against her daughter. "Maybe if I had talked to her more, if I had forced the principal to take action." Phoebe hugged her mother tighter, but inside she was burning with rage. She remembered how her parents fought for Emily, how they begged the school administration to intervene, how Principal Miller dismissed them with phrases like "kids will be kids," and "this will teach them to be stronger." How the school psychologist, Dr. Reynolds, suggested working on self-esteem instead of punishing the guilty. "It's not your fault, Mom. It never was," Phoebe said. But deep down, she knew her family had been falling apart for a whole year. Her father was drinking more, her mother hardly left the house, and Phoebe herself had become even more withdrawn, gaining another 20 kilograms from stress. On her way to school, Phoebe, as always, walked alone. Her only friend, Madison Taylor, lived on the other side of town, and they only met at school. Madison was Phoebe's complete opposite, slender, energetic, with a mass of curly red hair and an endless optimism that sometimes even annoyed her. But she was the only person at Central Riverdale High who treated Phoebe like a real person. The thing was, Madison had a secret that no one knew except Phoebe. 2 years ago, she had been overweight herself, weighing almost 90 kilograms at a height of 155 centimeters. But the summer before senior year, she was hospitalized with serious heart problems, and the doctors literally forced her to lose weight, threatening disability. In 6 months, Madison transformed into a slim girl, but the memories of what it was like to be the target of ridicule remained forever. Phoebe, wait!" Madison caught up with her at the school entrance, breathing heavily. "Listen, I have to tell you something. I accidentally overheard a conversation between Brad Collins and his gang yesterday after school." Phoebe felt her blood run cold. Brad Collins is the captain of the football team, the golden boy of the school, the son of the owner of the largest car dealership in town. Tall, muscular, with a perfect smile and a complete lack of conscience. He was the main instigator of Emily's bullying a year ago. "What did they say?" Phoebe tried to stay calm, but her hands were already shaking. They are planning something special for today. In honor of the anniversary. You understand? Brad said he wants to pay tribute to little Harrison, and everyone laughed. "Phoebe, I think they are going to do something terrible." At that moment, Phoebe felt something switch in her mind. All the fear, all the pain of the past year suddenly transformed into something else, something cold and resolute. "Thank you for the warning," she said in a calm voice that made Madison look at her in surprise. "Phoebe, you look strange. What are you going to do?" "Nothing special, just going to class." But that was a lie. Phoebe knew that everything would change today. She was tired of being afraid, tired of hiding, tired of letting these monsters destroy lives with impunity. The thing is, Phoebe had a secret that no one knew, not even Madison. A secret she had carefully hidden for several years. 3 years ago, when the bullying of Emily had just started, their father, Michael, decided to enroll both daughters in a strength training program. He had boxed in his youth and understood that the girls needed to be able to defend themselves. Emily quickly quit training. She was too fragile and couldn't handle the physical strain. But Phoebe found that she liked it. The coach, a former professional boxer named Rocky Morales, immediately noticed her unusual talent. Despite her excess weight, Phoebe had amazing coordination, lightning-fast reflexes, and simply phenomenal physical strength. By the time Emily died, Phoebe could bench press 70 kilograms and squat with a 90-kilogram barbell. Impressive results for a girl her age. But after her sister's death, she stopped going to training. Her parents were too absorbed in their own grief to pay attention to what their older daughter was doing. Phoebe just locked herself at home, stress eating and gaining weight. However, the muscles didn't disappear, they just hid under a layer of fat. The first 2 classes went relatively smoothly. In history, Mr. Johnson talked about the Civil War, and Phoebe noted the bitter irony in what he said about the fight for justice, while complete lawlessness was happening in his own school. In math, Mrs. Parker solved equations, but the only equation that interested Phoebe right now was simple. Revenge equals justice. But during the big break, everything began. Phoebe was standing by her locker, taking out books for the next class, when she felt someone's gaze. Turning around, she saw Brad Collins and his gang, Jason Williams, Trey Davis, and Kyle Anderson. All 4 were tall, athletic, and completely confident in their impunity. "Look who we have here," Brad said, slowly approaching. "Phoebe Harrison in the flesh. Do you know what day it is today, fatty?" Phoebe tried to walk past, but Jason blocked her way. "Hey, we're talking to you. It's rude to ignore people, especially on such a special day," Trey added, pulling out a smartphone from his pocket. "You know, we thought it would be nice to honor your little sister's memory. She loved attention, right?" Phoebe's heart was pounding so loudly that she was sure everyone around could hear it. "Leave Emily alone." "Oh, but we can't do that." Brad feigned false sympathy. "You see, little Emily Harrison left behind a real legacy. She showed everyone what happens to losers who can't handle reality, and we think her older sister should continue the family tradition." A crowd began to gather in the hallway. The students could smell scandal and were drawn to it like flies to honey. Phoebe saw familiar faces, but not a single person took a step to help her. They just stood there watching, pulling out their phones, preparing to capture her humiliation. "You know what's funny?" Brad continued, clearly enjoying the moment. "Your sister was at least cute, slim, and you... Oh my God, it's painful to look at you. How do you even fit through doorways?" Phoebe felt something inside her start to boil, but it wasn't fear or humiliation. It was pure, white rage. "Come on, don't be silent." Kyle nudged her shoulder. "Say something, or are you as mute as your sister was before?" He didn't get to finish the sentence because Phoebe grabbed his hand faster than anyone could react. Her fingers tightened around his wrist with such force that Kyle immediately let out a pained scream. "Never mention my sister again," she said in a quiet but absolutely clear voice. "Never." "Hey, let him go, Cal." Brad tried to push Phoebe away, but she didn't even budge. Her grip was stronger than an iron trap. "Phoebe, let go!" Kyle struggled to break free, but Phoebe held him as if his hand were made of paper. It was at that moment that Principal Miller appeared in the hallway, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and tired eyes. In the years since Emily's death, she had noticeably aged, and Phoebe sometimes thought that the principal felt genuine remorse. But it was too little and too late. "What is going on here?" Principal Miller looked sternly at the gathered crowd. "Miss Harrison, release Mr. Anderson immediately." Phoebe slowly loosened her fingers, and Kyle yanked his hand away, rubbing the red marks on his wrist. But her gaze remained fixed on Brad Collins' face, and what he saw in her eyes made him step back for a moment. "Mr. Collins, your version of events?" The principal wearily rubbed her brow. "We were just talking to Phoebe, Mrs. Miller. We wanted to support her on such a tough day. And then she suddenly attacked Kyle for no reason." Brad feigned innocence so skillfully that even Phoebe momentarily doubted her own righteousness. "Is that true, Miss Harrison?" Phoebe remained silent. She knew that if she told the truth, no one would believe her anyway. Brad was the golden boy of the school, and she was the outcast, the sister of a suicide victim. In the equation of school justice, she had no chance. Miss Harrison, I am waiting for an answer. We were just talking, Phoebe finally said, her voice completely even. Principal Miller sighed. Then let's all disperse. And Miss Harrison, if you feel that you cannot control your emotions on such a difficult day, perhaps it would be wise to call your parents? No, thank you. I have everything under control. The crowd began to disperse, but Brad lingered. He stepped very close to Phoebe and whispered so quietly that only she could hear. This isn't over yet, fat girl. Your sister was just a warm-up. Today we're going to put on a show in her honor that the whole town will be talking about. And you won't be able to do anything because you're just as weak a loser as she was. At that moment, something finally broke in Phoebe's mind. All the fears, all the self-doubt, all the attempts to be the good girl, it all vanished in an instant. Only crystal-clear determination remained. We'll see about that, she whispered in response. And there was something in her voice that made Brad freeze for a moment. The next 2 classes passed in a blur. Phoebe sat in biology, listening to Mr. Thompson talk about predators and prey in the wild, and she thought about how the same laws apply in human society. The strong devour the weak, and the only way to survive is to stop being weak. In English, Mrs. Brown was reading To Kill a Mockingbird and discussing how important it is to protect the innocent. Phoebe listened and thought about how adults love beautiful words about justice, but when it comes to real actions, they always find reasons not to intervene. During lunch, Madison tried to talk to her, but Phoebe barely responded. She was too focused on what was happening in the cafeteria. Brad and his gang were sitting at their usual table in the center of the hall, but today they were clearly planning something. They kept glancing in her direction and whispering to each other, occasionally laughing. Phoebe, can you hear me? Madison waved her hand in front of her face. You look like you're ready to kill someone. Not just anyone, someone specific. Phoebe, you're scaring me. Please just ignore them. There are only a year and a half left until graduation, and then we'll go to college and never see those idiots again. Phoebe looked at her only friend. Sweet, naive Madison. She truly believed that one could just wait it out, that if you ignore a problem, it will disappear on its own. But Emily thought so too. And where is she now? You know, Maddie, I've been thinking a lot about what happened to Emily, and I've realized one thing. She didn't die because she was weak. She died because there wasn't a single person strong enough to protect her. Phoebe, including me, I was a coward. I knew what they were doing to her, but I was afraid to draw their attention to myself. I thought if I stayed invisible, they wouldn't touch me. But you know what? They touched me anyway. And Emily died. Madison reached out and squeezed Phoebe's hand. It's not your fault. Maybe, but what happens next will be entirely my doing. After lunch, there was gym class, and that's when Brad decided to put his plan into action. Coach Johnson announced that they would be playing dodgeball today, a game Phoebe hated more than anything in the world. It was just a legalized opportunity for the strong to bully the weak. Teams were chosen by captains, and naturally, Phoebe was picked last. She ended up on a team against Brad, Jason, Trey, and Kyle, and she knew it was no coincidence. All right, guys, you know the rules. Coach Johnson was a man in his 40s, a former military man who genuinely believed that sports build character. Play fair, no roughness. Let's start. The first 5 minutes passed relatively calmly. Balls flew back and forth. Players were eliminated and returned. But Phoebe noticed that Brad's quartet was clearly waiting for the right moment. That moment came when only 6 players were left on the court. Phoebe and 2 guys from her team against Brad, Jason, and Trey. The coach was momentarily distracted, breaking up a fight on the adjacent court, and Brad immediately signaled to his friends. All 3 balls flew at Phoebe simultaneously. This was against the rules. Only 1 ball could be thrown at a time, but the coach was not nearby, and the other players were too scared to say anything. Phoebe managed to dodge the first ball, caught the second, but the third hit her square in the stomach with such force that she doubled over, gasping for breath. According to the rules of the game, she should have been out, but instead she slowly straightened up and looked directly at Brad. Oops, sorry, fatty, he mocked. You're such a big target, it's hard to miss. Yeah, like a barn, Jason added, or like your dead sister. She was also an easy target. The gym suddenly fell silent. Even Coach Johnson, who had just returned, froze upon hearing the last words. Mr. Williams, what did you just say? His voice was low and threatening. Nothing special, Coach. Just discussing game strategy. But Phoebe was no longer listening. Something strange was happening in her head. She suddenly saw the whole situation very clearly, as if from the outside. She realized that this moment was inevitable. The last 3 years had led to it. Emily's death, months of humiliation, the indifference of adults, her own cowardice. All of it was just a prelude to what was about to happen now. Phoebe picked up the ball she had caught a minute ago, a regular rubber ball weighing about 1 kilogram. In her hands, it felt as light as a feather. "Hey, Brad," she said in a calm voice. He turned around, still smirking. "What, fatty?" "Catch." Phoebe threw the ball not like regular school kids do during a game. She threw it like professional pitchers in baseball, using all the strength of her body, all the power of the muscles that had been hidden under layers of fat for years. The ball flew the distance between them in a fraction of a second and hit Brad squarely in the solar plexus with such force that the sound of the impact echoed off the gym walls. Brad doubled over like a pocket knife and collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. His face instantly turned blue, his eyes bulged, and raspy sounds erupted from his throat. The gym fell into absolute silence. Even the sounds from the neighboring courts faded, as if the entire school sensed that something significant had happened. "Oh my God," Coach Johnson whispered, rushing to Brad. "Someone call the nurse, immediately." Jason and Trey stood over their leader, not understanding what was happening. Brad still couldn't breathe, his body convulsing on the gym floor. "What have you done, you psycho?" Jason turned to Phoebe, but seeing the expression on her face instinctively took a step back. "I played by your rules," Phoebe said, her voice devoid of anger or satisfaction. Just cold calmness. "You wanted a game? Here you go." Coach Johnson helped Brad sit up, and he finally managed to take a gasping breath. The color of his face slowly returned to normal, but he still couldn't speak. "Miss Harrison, to the principal's office, immediately." The coach was in shock. In 20 years of working at the school, he had never seen anything like this. Phoebe nodded and headed toward the gym exit. At the threshold, she turned and looked at Brad, who was still sitting on the floor, holding his chest with his hands. "Emily is no longer with us," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "But I'm here, and if any of you decide to play your games again, remember, I can play too." The school corridors buzzed with rumors even before Phoebe reached the principal's office. News spread like wildfire among teenagers, especially when it came to something so unexpected. "Phoebe Harrison almost killed Brad Collins. Did you see how she hit him with that ball? He couldn't even breathe. And she didn't even apologize, just stood there and watched. They say she's a total psycho. It's hereditary. Remember her sister?" Phoebe heard snippets of conversations and understood that by the end of the day, she would either be a hero or the #1 outcast. But the strange thing was, she didn't care at all. For the first time in many months, she felt truly alive. In the principal's reception area, she met Madison, who looked as if she had seen a ghost. "Phoebe, what's going on? Everyone's saying that I almost killed Brad Collins? That's an exaggeration. I just showed him what it's like to be a target." "But you do realize what will happen? His father owns half the town. They could sue your family, expel you from school, press charges against you." Phoebe looked at her friend in surprise. "Maddie, do you remember what happened when they drove Emily to suicide? Did anyone get expelled? Did anyone get sued? Or did everyone just pretend nothing happened?" Madison opened her mouth to respond but realized she had nothing to say. Phoebe was right. After Emily's death, the school administration conducted a formal investigation that found no direct link between the actions of the students and Emily Harrison's tragic decision. Brad and his friends received a verbal warning and continued their studies as if nothing had happened. The principal's office door opened and Mrs. Miller appeared in person. She looked tired and bewildered. "Miss Harrison, please come in." The principal's office was furnished in an attempt to create a cozy atmosphere. Soft chairs, potted plants, photographs of graduates on the walls. But Phoebe always felt like she was in a courtroom here, where the verdict was known in advance. "Sit down, Phoebe. We need to have a serious talk." Phoebe sat in the chair opposite the principal's desk and looked her straight in the eye. No fear, no remorse, just calm confidence. "Coach Johnson told me about what happened in the gym. The school nurse also called me. Brad Collins sustained a severe chest contusion and a concussion. The doctors recommended he take a few days off." "I'm sorry to hear that," Phoebe said in a flat voice. "Sorry?" Phoebe, do you understand the seriousness of the situation? You could have crippled a classmate no more than he crippled my sister. Principal Miller leaned back in her chair and rubbed her temples. Phoebe, I understand that today is a tough day for your family. The anniversary of Emily's death is... Don't you dare, Phoebe's voice turned icy. Don't you dare mention my sister's name while pretending you cared about her. Where was your concern when she came to you and told you what was happening to her? Where was your concern when our parents begged you to take action? Ms. Harrison, I did everything I could. You did everything to avoid creating problems for wealthy parents. You turned a blind eye because Brad Collins brings money and reputation to the school, and Emily was just a statistic. The principal fell silent, and in that silence, Phoebe read more than in any words. She was right, and they both knew it. Well, Mrs. Miller finally said, regardless of the circumstances, your actions are unacceptable. I am forced to suspend you from classes for a week. An investigation will also be conducted, and depending on its results, further measures may be taken. I understand, Phoebe stood up from the chair. May I go? Phoebe, the principal stopped her at the door. I really tried to help your sister. Perhaps not as I should have, but I tried, and I don't want the same thing to happen to you. Phoebe turned around and looked at the woman who could have saved Emily but didn't. Nothing will happen to me anymore, because I am no longer a victim. Stepping out of the principal's office, Phoebe found that the atmosphere at school had changed dramatically. Students looked at her completely differently, with caution, with respect, with curiosity. No one laughed behind her back or made mocking comments about her weight anymore. Madison was waiting for her at her locker, but she was accompanied by several other people Phoebe had hardly noticed before. Among them was Sarah Jones, the quiet girl from her math class who was constantly bullied for wearing glasses and being into science. Next to her stood Marcus Brown, one of the few black students in the school who regularly faced racist comments, and a few other kids, all of whom had one thing in common. They were all outcasts. Phoebe, Sarah began uncertainly, we wanted to say thank you. For what? For doing what none of us dared to do. For showing those bastards that we have teeth too. Marcus nodded. The whole school is talking about it. Brad Collins is in the nurse's office. His friends are in shock, and Coach Johnson is reviewing the dodgeball rules. Phoebe looked at these kids, the ones who usually went unnoticed, who were used to keeping their heads down and hoping to get by, and she realized that something important had happened. She had become not just the girl who stood up to a bully, she had become a symbol. I'm not a hero, she said quietly. I'm just tired of putting up with it. Sometimes that's enough, Sarah replied. At that moment, the principal's voice came over the school intercom. Attention! All students must immediately return to their classrooms. Gatherings in the hallways are prohibited. Repeat. Looks like they're afraid of a revolution, Marcus smirked. And maybe they should be, Madison added, who had been silent until then. The last two classes of the day passed in a strange atmosphere. The teachers were clearly warned about what had happened, because they all carefully avoided any mention of the incident and tried to maintain as neutral an atmosphere as possible. But the students were buzzing. In English class, Mrs. Brown attempted to discuss symbolism in To Kill a Mockingbird, but half the class was passing notes about what had happened in the gym. In chemistry, Mr. Wilson was explaining the laws of thermodynamics, while the kids whispered that Phoebe Harrison was like an atomic bomb, quiet on the outside but explosive. After school, Phoebe was in for a surprise. Her father's truck, an old pickup he usually drove home from the auto shop, was waiting for her at the entrance. Michael Harrison looked tired and worried. Get in, he said when Phoebe approached the truck. They drove in silence for the first 10 minutes. Phoebe looked out the window at the familiar streets of Riverdale and thought about how this quiet town could hide so much pain and cruelty beneath its idyllic surface. The principal called me, her father finally said. She told me what happened. And what do you think? Michael pulled the truck over to the side of the road and turned to his daughter. His eyes were red, not from tears but from exhaustion and the constant stress he had been under since Emily's death. I think that kid got what he deserved, and I think I should have done it myself a year ago. Phoebe looked at her father in surprise. She expected to hear a lecture about violence and self-control, but instead she received support. Phoebe, I know that your mom and I haven't been the best parents this past year. We've been so caught up in our own grief that we forgot you were suffering too, that you needed protection as well. Dad, let me finish. When Emily... When that happened, I felt like a complete failure. I couldn't protect my little girl. I thought that if I worked more, if I earned more money, if we moved to a better neighborhood, I could somehow fix my mistake. But I didn't realize that while I was trying to fix the past, the same thing was happening to you. Phoebe felt her throat tighten. I didn't want you to worry. You had enough problems as it was. No, sweetheart, you are my main concern, in a good way. You are my responsibility, my pride, my reason to get up every morning. And if someone hurts you, then that's my problem too. Michael hugged his daughter, and for the first time in many months, Phoebe felt truly protected. Not because she had become physically stronger, but because she understood she was not alone. What happens next? She asked. Next, we go home, tell your mom everything, and figure out how to move forward, together. At home, they were greeted by Susan Harrison, who was already aware of the incident thanks to the grapevine of the small town. But instead of hysteria and accusations, Phoebe saw something different in her mother's eyes: pride and determination. Well, Susan said, hugging her daughter, it looks like we have a real fighter growing in our family. Mom, are you mad? Mad? Sweetheart, I'm mad at myself for letting you deal with this alone for so long. They sat down in the kitchen, and for the first time in a year, the Harrisons openly talked about what had happened to Emily, what was happening with Phoebe, and what they would do next. Tomorrow I'm going to school, Michael said, and I demand a meeting with the parents of that Collins kid and his whole gang. It's time for adults to handle adult problems. What if they sue us? Susan asked. Let them sue. I have records of all our communications with the school regarding Emily. There are witnesses to what happened today, and I have a lawyer who will be very happy to represent a family whose daughter was defending herself from bullies. Phoebe listened to her parents and realized that something had changed, not only in her, but in them as well. Emily's death had shattered their family, but today's events somehow began to piece it back together. That evening, lying in bed, Phoebe thought about everything that had happened in just one day. In the morning, she was a frightened, chubby girl who only dreamed of not being noticed. But now she had become something like a local celebrity, a symbol of resistance for some and a dangerous psychopath for others. Her phone was buzzing with messages. Some students wrote words of support, others sent threats. There were also those who simply wanted to know the details. But what touched her the most was a message from Sarah Jones. Thank you for showing us that we don't have to be victims. Tomorrow, for the first time in 3 years, I won't be afraid to go to school. Phoebe turned off her phone and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would be a new day, and she had no idea what it would bring. But one thing she knew for sure, she would never again be that girl who silently endured bullying and hoped everything would resolve itself. She had become someone else, someone ready to fight. And if Emily was watching all of this somewhere, Phoebe hoped her sister would be proud of her. The next morning, Phoebe woke up to the sound of car doors slamming outside her window. Looking out into the yard, she saw 2 SUVs, one black Escalade and the other silver Lexus. A man in his 50s stepped out of the first vehicle, dressed in an expensive suit. She recognized Richard Collins, Brad's father, and the owner of the largest car dealership in the county. 3 other men in suits emerged from the second vehicle, whom she didn't recognize. But by their appearance, it was clear they were lawyers. Phoebe, come down, her mother called. We have guests. The living room was filled with a tense atmosphere. Michael Harrison sat in his work overalls. He hadn't had time to change after his night shift at the auto shop. Susan stood next to him, arms crossed over her chest. Opposite them sat the 4 men in suits, looking extremely out of place in the modest Harrison home. Ah, here she is. Richard Collins stood up as Phoebe entered the room. The young lady who nearly killed my son. Mr. Collins, Phoebe's father also stood. Let's not exaggerate. Your son received a lesson he has long deserved. A lesson? One of the lawyers opened a folder filled with documents. Mr. Harrison, your daughter injured my client. Doctors diagnosed him with a severe chest contusion and a mild concussion. Brad spent the night under medical supervision. Phoebe felt a pang of guilt, but quickly suppressed it. Brad spent 1 night in the hospital while Emily spent an eternity in the grave. And what do you propose? Susan asked in an icy tone. We are willing not to file a police report, Richard Collins said, provided your family pays the medical expenses, publicly apologizes, and your daughter is transferred to another school. Or, Michael crossed his arms, or we file an assault charge, demand compensation for emotional damages in the amount of $100,000, and your daughter receives a criminal record that will ruin her future." Silence hung in the room. Phoebe looked at these men in expensive suits who had come to their home to intimidate her family, and she felt the same rage rising inside her as it had yesterday in the gym. "May I say something?" she asked. "Phoebe, you shouldn't," her mother began. "No, Mom, I should." Phoebe looked directly at Richard Collins. "Mr. Collins, do you know what your son did to my sister?" "I see no connection." "He drove her to suicide. He and his friends bullied a 14-year-old girl for months until she decided that life wasn't worth such torment. And do you know what the school administration did? Nothing. And what did the police do? Also nothing, because your family is too influential in this town." Richard Collins turned red. "Those are serious accusations, young lady. Those are facts. And if you want to arrange a public trial, I would be more than happy, because then the whole town will know the truth about what happened to Emily, and that your son continued the same bullying against me." One of the lawyers whispered something in Collins' ear, and his expression changed. "Fine," he finally said. "Maybe we can find a compromise." "No compromises," Michael Harrison said firmly. "My daughter was defending herself, and if your son can't accept what he got coming, that's his problem." "Michael," Susan placed a hand on her husband's shoulder, "I think Mr. Collins wants to say something else." Richard Collins sighed heavily. "Listen, I don't want to escalate this conflict. Brad sometimes behaves poorly. Maybe he really needs a lesson. But what your daughter did is too much. And what your son did to my daughters is okay?" Michael stepped forward, and the lawyers instinctively tensed up. "Mr. Harrison, let's keep this civil." "Civil?" Susan laughed bitterly. "You talk about civility when your children drove my youngest daughter to the grave?" Phoebe watched this scene unfold and understood that something important was happening. Her parents were no longer broken people hiding from problems. They had become who they should have been a year ago, defenders of their children. "All right," Richard Collins stood up. "I see there will be no peaceful resolution. Prepare for court." "We're ready," Phoebe said calmly. "And are you ready for the entire state to find out what's going on in your school?" After the guests left, the Harrison family sat down to discuss the situation. Michael had already contacted his old friend, lawyer David Miller, a namesake of the school principal, who specialized in student rights cases. "David says we have a good chance," the father reported, "especially if we can prove it was self-defense." "What about the school?" Phoebe asked. "I've been suspended. Temporarily," the mother said. "And if it goes to court, it might not just be you who gets suspended." At that moment, the home phone rang. Susan answered and a minute later handed the receiver to her daughter. "It's for you. Some journalist." "Hello." "Hi, this is Jessica Turner from the Oregon Daily newspaper. Can we meet? I would like to talk to you about what happened at school." "Why?" "Because your story could help many other kids who are facing bullying, and because the public has a right to know what's happening in schools." Phoebe looked at her parents, who nodded. "Okay, but only in the presence of my parents." Jessica Turner turned out to be a woman in her mid-30s, with intelligent eyes and the keen gaze of a professional journalist. She arrived an hour later and immediately stated that this could become a big story. "You see, the issue of bullying is very pressing across the country, and cases where victims fight back always attract attention. But your situation is special because there's a tragic backstory." For the next 2 hours, Phoebe recounted what had happened to Emily, her own experiences, and the incident from yesterday. Jessica recorded every word, asked clarifying questions, and requested documents. "I will reach out to the Collins family's lawyers for comments," she said at the end. "The article will come out the day after tomorrow. Be prepared for your life to change significantly after this." "For the better?" Phoebe asked. "That depends on how you handle fame, because I'm afraid you're going to become very well known." The rest of the day, the family spent preparing for the upcoming battles. Michael took a day off work to meet with the lawyer. Susan reached out to other parents of students who had also faced bullying. And Phoebe was just trying to grasp how her life had turned upside down in one day. In the evening, Madison called her. "Phoebe, are you okay? The whole school is saying that the Collins lawyers came to your house." "Yeah, they did. They tried to intimidate us." "And what? It didn't work." "Oh my God, Phoebe, do you realize what you're doing? The Collins practically run this town. They can destroy your family." "Maddie," Phoebe spoke calmly, but there was steel in her voice. "My family was already destroyed a year ago, when Emily died. Right now, We are just trying to rise from the ruins. But no buts. I am tired of hiding, tired of being afraid. If they want a war, they will get one. The next day, which Phoebe was supposed to spend at home due to her suspension, something unexpected happened. By noon, a small crowd had gathered outside the house. Students, parents, even a few teachers. They brought flowers, notes of support, posters with slogans like, "Phoebe is a hero," and "Enough of the bullying." "What's going on?" Phoebe asked her mother. "It seems you've become a symbol of resistance," Susan replied, looking out the window. Among those gathered was Sarah Jones with a group of other outcasts from school. There was Marcus Brown with a few younger students. There were even parents whose children had taken their own lives at other schools in the district. Phoebe stepped onto the porch, and the crowd fell silent. "I don't know what to say," she began. "I didn't want to become a hero. I'm just tired of being a victim." "You've given us hope," one of the mothers shouted. "My daughter couldn't stand up for herself for 3 years. And yesterday, for the first time in that time, she came home smiling because she realized she can fight back." "Phoebe Harrison for president," someone joked, and the crowd laughed. But the laughter was interrupted by the sound of sirens. 2 police cars pulled up to the house, and Sheriff David Thompson and his deputy stepped out. "Miss Harrison," the sheriff said, "I need to speak with you." The crowd tensed. Michael Harrison quickly stepped out of the house and stood next to his daughter. "What's the matter, Sheriff?" "There's been a report of assault involving your daughter. I need to ask her a few questions." "In the presence of a lawyer," Michael said firmly. "Of course, but formally I must inform Miss Harrison that a case has been opened against her." Phoebe stepped forward. "Sheriff Thompson, I'm ready to answer any questions. I have no secrets." "Phoebe," her father began. "No, Dad. Let the whole town know the truth." Sheriff Thompson was a man in his 50s who had served in this position for 15 years. He remembered the Harrison family from before the tragedy and had always regarded them with sympathy. "Miss Harrison, please tell me in your own words what happened at school." And Phoebe told her story, right there, on the porch of her home, in front of the journalists who had arrived, in front of neighbors and classmates. She spoke about the years of bullying Emily endured, her own suffering, and what happened in the gym. "I didn't attack him," she concluded. "I was defending myself. And if that's a crime, then I'm ready to face the consequences." The sheriff was silent for a long time, then said, "Miss Harrison, formally I must refer this case to the prosecutor. But personally, I believe any girl has the right to defend herself against bullies." He turned to the crowd. "And now I ask everyone to disperse. This is private property." But the people did not disperse. Instead, they began to applaud. At first quietly, then louder, until the applause turned into a standing ovation. Phoebe stood on the porch of her home, surrounded by the support of people she barely knew, and realized that her life had changed forever. She was no longer the chubby, quiet girl who was afraid of her own shadow. She had become something more, a symbol for all those who were tired of enduring injustice. And somewhere in the city, Brad Collins lay in his room with a bandaged chest, feeling fear for the first time in his life. Not physical fear, that had passed, but the fear that the world in which he was used to being king was crumbling before his eyes. 3 days later, Jessica Turner's article made the front page not only of the local newspaper, but was also picked up by major publications across the state. The headline, "Revenge for a Sister: How a School Outcast Became a Symbol of the Fight Against Bullying," caught the attention of national media. A line of journalists, activists, and just curious onlookers formed outside the Harrison family home. The phone was ringing off the hook with calls from talk show producers wanting to invite Phoebe on air. The mayor of the city called an emergency city council meeting to discuss the crisis in the education system. But the most important things were happening at the school itself. Principal Miller was called to the State Department of Education to provide explanations. Several teachers submitted resignation letters, unable to withstand public pressure. And the students felt for the first time in many years that their voices could be heard. Sarah Jones organized a student committee against bullying. Marcus Brown filed an official complaint about racist incidents that had previously been hushed up. Even the parents of elementary school students began demanding meetings with the administration. Phoebe watched all of this from home, where she was still under suspension. But this suspension no longer felt like a punishment. It was more like a breather before the storm. "Phoebe, you have visitors," her mother said as she entered the room. Standing in the doorway were 3 people she did not expect to see. Principal Miller, school psychologist Dr. Reynolds, and the chair of the parent committee, Mrs. Anderson, the mother of Kyle, the boy Phoebe had squeezed by the hand in the hallway. Miss Harrison, the principal looked as if she had aged 10 years in just a few days. We would like to talk to you. About what? About the future. About how we can change the situation at the school. They walked into the living room where Phoebe's parents and lawyer David Miller were already waiting. First of all, the principal began, I want to offer my official apologies to you, your family, and the memory of your sister. We made serious mistakes in handling bullying cases. Apologies won't bring Emily back, Susan said coldly. No, they won't, but they can prevent other tragedies. Dr. Reynolds leaned forward. Miss Harrison, what you did opened many eyes, including mine. I have worked with teenagers for years, but I did not understand the scale of the problem. Mrs. Anderson was a woman in her 40s with tired eyes. My son Kyle told me the truth about what was happening to your sister, and about how he himself participated in the bullying. I didn't know. Did you not know, or did you not want to know? Phoebe asked directly. I didn't want to, Mrs. Anderson honestly replied. It was easier for me to think of my son as just a popular boy, not a bully. Principal Miller opened a folder with documents. We have developed a new anti-bullying program, an anonymous complaint system, mandatory training for all staff, strict sanctions for any forms of harassment. Too late for Emily, Michael said, but not too late for other children, Dr. Reynolds countered. Miss Harrison, we would like to offer you the opportunity to be the face of this program, to help us create something that truly works. Phoebe looked at these adults who had ignored the problem for months and were now asking her for help. Part of her wanted to refuse, to send them away. But another part thought of Sarah, of Marcus, of all those children who were now suffering just as Emily had. And what about Brad and his friends? Mr. Collins is suspended until the end of the semester. Jason Williams is expelled for disciplinary violations. Trey Davis has been transferred to another school at the request of his parents. And that's it? The principal paused. Officially, yes. Unofficially, Mr. Collins Sr. is withdrawing his complaint against you. I think he realized that a public trial would do more harm than good to his family. Lawyer David Miller leaned toward Phoebe. This is good news. No charges, no court. What if I don't want him to withdraw the complaint? Phoebe suddenly said. What if I wanted to go to court? Silence fell in the room. Phoebe, her father began. No, Dad. If we agree to a quiet settlement now, nothing will change. In a year, everyone will forget, and everything will go back to the way it was. But if it goes to court, if the whole truth comes out, then something will really change. Miss Harrison, the principal was at a loss. A court case can last for months. It will be hard for everyone. You know what was hard? Watching my sister come home in tears every day? Кайл сидел в другом конце столовой, избегая взгляда Фиби. Она почувствовала, как сердце забилось быстрее. Вокруг нее царила атмосфера напряжения, но она была готова к этому. Когда Фиби подошла к своему столу, несколько одноклассников приветствовали ее с улыбками. «Ты молодец, Фиби», — сказал один из них. «Мы все с тобой». Это было неожиданно и приятно. Она села и попыталась сосредоточиться на еде, но мысли о Брэде не покидали ее. Он выглядел подавленным, и Фиби не могла не заметить, как он смотрел на нее с выражением, которое она не могла понять. Это была смесь злости и страха. Она знала, что он не изменился, но что-то в его взгляде заставляло ее сомневаться. Внезапно он встал и подошел к ее столу. «Фиби!» – начал он, но она прервала его. «Не сейчас, Брэд. Я не хочу с тобой говорить. Я просто хотел сказать, что... Я не хотел, чтобы все так вышло», – произнес он, и в его голосе звучала искренность, которую она не ожидала. «Ты не понимаешь, что ты сделал», – ответила она, не отводя взгляда. «Ты и твои друзья сделали это с Эмили. И теперь ты хочешь, чтобы я поверила, что тебе жаль?» Брэд опустил голову, и Фиби почувствовала, как внутри нее закипает гнев. «Ты не можешь просто прийти и сказать, что тебе жаль, и думать, что все будет как прежде». Он кивнул и, не дождавшись ответа, вернулся к своему столу. Фиби знала, что это не конец. Это было только начало. Вечером, когда она вернулась домой, Фиби почувствовала, как на нее навалилась усталость. Но в то же время она чувствовала, что делает что-то важное. Она была готова бороться за справедливость, за Эмили и за всех, кто страдал от буллинга. На следующий день она решила встретиться с Джессикой, чтобы обсудить, как продвигать свою историю дальше. «Мы должны сделать так, чтобы люди знали правду», — сказала она. «Это не просто моя история. Это история всех, кто сталкивается с буллингом». Джессика кивнула. «Я согласна. Мы можем организовать пресс-конференцию и пригласить СМИ. Это привлечет внимание к проблеме». Фиби почувствовала прилив энергии. Она знала, что это будет нелегко, но она была готова. Она не могла позволить, чтобы Эмилия и другие остались безголосыми. «Мы сделаем это», — сказала она уверенно. «Мы заставим людей услышать нас». Kyle sat at the opposite end of the cafeteria, avoiding eye contact with his former friends. When Phoebe entered the cafeteria, conversations hushed. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen when the two main characters of the school drama crossed paths. Phoebe grabbed a tray of food and headed to her usual table. As she walked past Brad, she felt his gaze. Turning around, she saw him looking at her with an expression no one expected to see on the face of the school king: fear and something resembling remorse. Their eyes met for a few seconds. Brad opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Phoebe nodded at him, not in a friendly way, but not hostile either, just acknowledging his existence. It was not the dramatic moment of revenge that the spectators had anticipated. It was something deeper, a silent understanding that the old world, where the strong could bully the weak with impunity, was dead. During lunch, a 7th grade girl approached Phoebe, a small, skinny girl with glasses. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "Can I sit with you?" "Of course. What's your name?" "Amy. Amy Garcia." The girl sat down and added even more quietly, "Thank you." "For what?" "For showing me that you can be strong, even if you don't look strong." Phoebe looked at the girl and saw herself 3 years ago, or Emily, and she realized that this was the true reason for everything that had happened. Not revenge, not justice in the abstract sense, but this little girl who was no longer afraid. After school, Phoebe was in for a surprise. At the entrance stood an elegant woman in her 40s, dressed in an expensive suit. "Miss Harrison? I'm Victoria Stone, an attorney from Portland. I represent the organization Voices Against Violence. We would like to propose a collaboration." "What kind of collaboration?" "We help victims of bullying across the country seek justice through the courts. Your case could set a precedent for hundreds of other families." Phoebe invited the woman to her home, where they spent the next 2 hours discussing possibilities. "You see," Victoria Stone explained, "most bullying cases go unreported precisely because victims fear exposure. But your story has already gained national resonance. If we achieve justice in your case, it will pave the way for thousands of other children." "And what does that mean for my family?" "It means the coming months will be very tough. The defense will try to tarnish your reputation in any way possible. They will dig into your past looking for any compromising information." Michael Harrison frowned. "And you think we should agree to this?" "I think you should know what you're getting into. But I also think you have a chance to change the lives of thousands of children." That evening, the family discussed the attorney's proposal. The decision was to be made by Phoebe, but her parents wanted to ensure she understood all the consequences. "It will be hard," her mother said. "They will try to portray you as a monster." "Mom, they're already doing that. The internet is full of comments saying I'm a dangerous psychopath. But court is a different level. This will be broadcast nationwide." Phoebe was silent for a long time, then said, "You know what I realized during these weeks? Emily didn't just die because she was bullied at school. She died because of silence. Because adults preferred to ignore the problem. Because other kids were afraid to stand up. Because the system protected the aggressors, not the victims." She stood up and walked over to the picture of Emily on the mantelpiece. "I can't bring my sister back, but I can make sure her death wasn't in vain. If my case saves even one child from what Emily went through, then all of this will have made sense." Michael hugged his daughter's shoulders. "Then we go all the way." 8 months later, the first day of the trial attracted unprecedented media attention. The courthouse in Portland was surrounded by television vans, and crowds of supporters and opponents held signs on either side of the entrance. "Justice for Emily," some chanted. "We will protect our children from violence," others responded. Phoebe walked towards the courthouse, accompanied by her parents and lawyers, trying to ignore the flashes of cameras and the shouts of journalists. "Miss Harrison, how do you feel before the trial begins?" "Phoebe, do you regret what you did?" "Miss Harrison, is it true that Hollywood wants to make a movie about your story?" She did not answer any questions until she reached the courthouse steps. There, she stopped and turned to the crowd of journalists. I want to say just one thing. Her voice was amplified by the reporter's microphones. This trial is not about revenge. It is about ensuring that no child has to go through what my sister Emily went through. The courtroom was packed. In the front rows sat Phoebe's parents, journalists, activists from anti-bullying organizations. Behind them were students and teachers from various schools who had come to support Phoebe. And on the opposite side of the room sat the Collins family and their supporters. Judge Margaret Wilson was a woman in her 60s with a reputation as a strict but fair judge. She had specialized for many years in cases involving minors' rights. "All rise," the bailiff announced. "The case of the state of Oregon versus Bradford Collins Jr. is now in session, charged with systematic bullying, driving to suicide, and causing psychological harm." This was a complex case because it simultaneously addressed charges against Phoebe for assault in the civil lawsuit from the Harrison family against Brad Collins in the school district for creating a hostile educational environment that led to Emily's death. The defense attorney, Robert Kingston, one of the most expensive lawyers in the state, stood for his opening statement. "Your Honor, esteemed jurors, today we are dealing with a flagrant act of violence committed within the walls of a school. My client, Phoebe Harrison, inflicted serious injuries on my defendant during a sports game. Yes, teenagers sometimes say inappropriate things, but that does not give anyone the right to resort to physical violence." He paused, surveying the jurors. "The defense will attempt to present this as an act of just retribution. But justice is served in courts, not in school gymnasiums. Phoebe Harrison is not a hero. She is an aggressor who could have maimed or even killed a classmate." When it was the prosecution's turn, Victoria Stone stood with a folder of documents in her hands. "Your Honor, esteemed jurors, today we are not just dealing with a case of a school fight. We are examining a case of systematic terror that drove a 14-year-old girl to suicide and continued against her sister." She approached the evidence stand, where a large photograph of Emily Harrison was displayed. Emily Harrison was an ordinary girl with her dreams and fears. She loved to read, play the piano, and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. But in the last months of her life, she thought only about how to avoid bullying at school. Victoria picked up a notebook. This is Emily's diary. In it, she recorded everything that happened to her. I will quote a few excerpts. She opened the notebook and began to read in a quiet but clear voice. September 15th. Today, Brad and his friends surrounded me in the hallway again. They said that freaks like me don't deserve to live. I tried to walk past, but they wouldn't let me go. A teacher walked by and said nothing. The courtroom was dead silent. September 23rd. They threw food at me in the cafeteria. When I complained to the supervising teacher, he said it was just kids being kids. I don't want to go to school anymore. Victoria's voice trembled, but she continued. October 12th. Today I heard them planning something special for my birthday. I'm scared. I'm thinking about telling my parents, but they are already worried about work. Maybe it would be better if I just disappeared. Several people in the courtroom cried. Even some jurors were wiping their eyes. The last entry is dated October 27th, the day before Emily's death. Victoria closed the diary. I will not read it aloud, but every jury member will receive a copy to understand what this girl felt in her final hours. She turned to the jurors. Phoebe Harrison is not the aggressor. She is a sister who could no longer silently watch the bullying. She is a girl who finally said, enough. And if we punish her for this, we will send a message to all the children in the country. Be silent, endure. Do not defend yourselves. The first witnesses for the prosecution were Emily's classmates who had witnessed the bullying but were afraid to intervene. Timothy Rogers, now an 8th grader, spoke with a trembling voice. I saw them pushing Emily in the hallway. They said terrible things. I wanted to help, but I was afraid that then they would turn on me. And how did you feel when you learned about Emily's death? Victoria asked. Guilt. Huge guilt. Because I could have done something, but I didn't. Amanda Clark, Emily's friend, cried as she recounted the last weeks of the girl's life. She said she saw no meaning in life, that every day at school was torture. I tried to support her, but I didn't realize how serious it all was. But the most powerful testimony came from the school nurse, Jennifer Thomas. Emily came to see me almost every day in the last month. She complained of headaches, nausea, sleep problems. These are all classic symptoms of chronic stress in children. Did you report this to the administration? Repeatedly, but I was told that these were normal teenage problems. And what do you think now? The nurse looked towards the Harrison family. Now I understand that I could have saved this girl if I had insisted. and this will haunt me for the rest of my life. The defense tried to discredit the witnesses, presenting their testimonies as attempts to shift the blame for their own inaction. Mr. Rogers, defense attorney Kingston, approached the teenager. You claim you saw the bullying, but why didn't you tell your parents or teachers? I was afraid. Afraid? Or did you just not consider it serious? No, maybe what you call bullying was just typical teenage squabbles? Victoria jumped up. Objection! The attorney is coercing the witness. Sustained, Judge Wilson glared at the defender. When it was Phoebe's turn to testify, the room fell silent in tense anticipation. She stepped up to the stand and placed her hand on the Bible. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Victoria Stone began with simple questions about family, school, and her relationship with Emily. Phoebe answered calmly and clearly, showing no emotion. Tell the jurors about the last months of your sister's life. Emily changed. She became withdrawn, sad. She stopped eating, slept poorly. When I asked what was wrong, she said everything was fine. Did you know she was being bullied at school? I suspected, but Emily asked me not to intervene. She was afraid it would only get worse. And what happened after her death? Phoebe paused for a few seconds, gathering her strength. I realized that I could have saved her, that I should have insisted, made my parents take action. And I promised myself that I would never be silent again when I see injustice. And how did you feel when Brad Collins and his friends started bullying you? Rage, but not just for myself, for Emily. They laughed at her death, called her a weakling, and I realized that they had learned nothing. Tell the jurors about what happened in the gym. Phoebe recounted the events of that day in detail, leaving out no details. I didn't plan to seriously harm him. I just wanted to show that I was no longer going to endure. Do you regret what you did? Phoebe was silent for a long time, then looked directly at the jurors. I regret that Brad was injured, but I do not regret that I defended myself. And if I could go back in time, I would protect Emily too. When the cross-examination began, Attorney Kingston tried to portray Phoebe as aggressive and unstable. Miss Harrison, is it true that you participated in strength sports? Yes. And you were aware of your physical strength? Yes. But despite that, you chose violence as a way to resolve the conflict? I chose self-defense. Self-defense? But nothing was threatening you at that moment. What threatened me was the same thing that killed my sister, the systematic humiliation that destroys the soul. Kingston attempted a different approach. Miss Harrison, you claim that your actions were driven by a desire to protect others. But didn't you consider that your example might inspire other kids to violence? I thought that my example could inspire other kids not to stay silent. Violence is what was done to Emily, and I just fought back. When Phoebe stepped down from the stand, there was complete silence in the room. Even the journalists stopped taking notes. The last witness for the prosecution was Susan Harrison. She spoke about how she tried to get protection for Emily, how she reached out to the school, how she was ignored. I lost one daughter due to the indifference of adults, she said, looking at the jurors through tears. I will not allow the system to break my second daughter. The defense called its witnesses, trying to present Brad as an ordinary teenager who became a victim of inappropriate aggression. His mother, Patricia Collins, cried on the stand, Brad is not an angel, but he is not a monster. Yes, he said something inappropriate, but kids do that. It's not a reason to hurt them. Principal Miller gave contradictory testimony, trying to justify the inaction of the school administration. We did everything possible within our authority. Unfortunately, teenage conflicts are difficult to prevent, but the most unexpected witness was Brad Collins himself. Against the advice of his attorneys, he insisted on testifying. He stepped up to the stand, noticeably thinner and older after these months. His usual self-confidence had vanished without a trace. Mr. Collins, his attorney began, tell the jurors what happened in the gym. I was playing dodgeball. Phoebe threw the ball at me so hard that I thought I was dying. I couldn't breathe. I thought I had broken ribs. And how did you feel? Fear, pain. I never thought someone could hate me that much. During cross-examination, Victoria Stone showed no mercy. Mr. Collins, what did you say to Phoebe just before she threw the ball? I don't remember exactly. Don't remember? Let me refresh your memory. You said your sister was just a warm-up. Is that true? Brad paled. Maybe I said something like that. And also, today we'll put on such a show in her honor that the whole town will talk about it, right? I didn't think... What were you thinking, Mr. Collins? That the death of a 14-year-old girl is a reason for jokes? No, Do you realize that your words and actions led to the death of Emily Harrison? The defense attorney jumped up. Objection! There is no direct evidence. Overruled, Judge Wilson looked at Brad. Answer the question, Mr. Collins. Brad was silent for a long time, then quietly said, I think we are all guilty of what happened to Emily. A murmur rose in the courtroom. The defense attorney tried to interrupt the questioning, but the judge allowed it to continue. Mr. Collins, do you regret your actions? Yes, every day. If I could change something. And what would you say to the Harrison family? Brad looked towards Phoebe and her parents. Tears streamed down his face. I'm sorry for Emily, for Phoebe, for being such a monster. The closing arguments were emotional on both sides. Attorney Kingston urged the jurors not to let emotions overshadow the facts. Yes, the death of Emily Harrison is a tragedy, but that does not give her sister the right to resort to violence. We live in a civilized society where disputes are resolved with words, not fists. Victoria Stone, in her speech, addressed the very essence of the matter. Dear jurors, you are not just deciding the fate of one girl. You are deciding what kind of society we want to build for our children. A society where victims remain silent and endure, or a society where they can defend themselves. The jurors deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned to the courtroom, the forewoman of the jury, an elderly woman named Doris Henderson, stood with the verdict. In the case of the state of Oregon versus Phoebe Harrison on the charge of assault, not guilty. The courtroom erupted in applause. Phoebe hugged her parents and lawyers, crying with relief. But Judge Wilson was not finished. Mr. Collins, she addressed Brad, although the criminal charges against Miss Harrison have been dropped, the question of civil liability for the death of Emily Harrison remains. She paused. Considering the testimony of witnesses and your own admission, the court awards compensation to the Harrison family in the amount of $50,000. Furthermore, you are required to undergo rehabilitation and complete 200 hours of community service with organizations that assist victims of bullying. Brad nodded, accepting the decision without objection. And finally, the judge looked at everyone present. I order the establishment of a task force to review anti-bullying policies in the schools of the county. Miss Harrison will be invited as a consultant and representative of student interests. A year later, Phoebe stood before the mirror in her new room at Portland University, where she had enrolled on a full scholarship. On the desk lay letters from children across the country, thanking her for showing them how to fight against injustice. The anti-bullying task force, where she worked as a consultant, had already achieved the adoption of new rules in the county schools, and their experience was being studied in other states. The rate of teenage suicides in Oregon had decreased by 15%. Brad Collins had fulfilled all the court's requirements and even became a volunteer at an organization helping victims of bullying. He wrote Phoebe a letter, once again apologizing and sharing how his life had changed. Madison enrolled at the same university and became Phoebe's best friend in her new life. Sarah Jones was accepted into MIT with record scores. The confidence she gained after Phoebe's story helped her unlock her potential. Phoebe's parents moved to Portland to be closer to their daughter. Michael opened his own auto repair shop, and Susan became a family counselor, helping parents of children facing bullying. In the evening, Phoebe sat in her room and wrote a letter. Dear Emily, today marks a year since the trial, a year since the whole world learned your story. I know you wouldn't have wanted such fame, but your death saved the lives of hundreds of other children. Last week, I received a letter from a girl in Texas. Her name was Katie. She was 14, just as old as you. She said she was going to take her own life because of bullying at school, but she watched a documentary about our story and changed her mind. Instead, she reached out for help. Katie is alive now. She has a future, and it's thanks to you, Em. I didn't become who I planned to be. I wasn't going to become a public figure, speak at conferences, write a book. But sometimes life chooses a path for us. I dream that you are proud of me, that somewhere you are watching all of this and smiling, that your pain has finally found meaning. I promise I will continue to fight. For you, for all the children who cannot stand up for themselves. For the right to be different, for the right to be protected, for the right to simply be children. Your sister, who will never forget you, Phoebe. She sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it in a box next to a photograph of Emily. In this box lay all the letters she had written to her sister since her death. A way to cope with pain, a way to feel connected to the one who will forever remain a 14-year-old girl with dreams of the future. Outside, the rain was falling, a soft, warm rain of Oregon. Phoebe opened the window and tilted her face into the streams of water, feeling the fatigue of a difficult day wash away. Tomorrow she had an important meeting with senators in Washington regarding federal anti-bullying legislation. The day after tomorrow, a speech at Harvard in front of future teachers. Next week, an interview for a documentary about teenage suicides. Sometimes she wished she could go back to that quiet life when the biggest problem was finding the right outfit. But then she remembered Katie from Texas, Mike from Florida, Sophia from California, about all the kids who wrote to her and said that her story gave them the strength to fight. Phoebe looked at her reflection in the window. She had lost 30 kilograms over the past year, not due to diets or insecurities, but because a life filled with purpose left no time for stress eating. But the main change was not in her appearance. The main change was in her eyes. They no longer held fear, uncertainty, or the desire to hide. There was determination, strength, and something that could be called wisdom, the kind of wisdom that comes to those who have walked through fire and not been burned. The phone rang. It was her mom. "Hi, sweetheart. How are you?" "Good, Mom. Preparing for tomorrow's meeting." "I'm proud of you, Phoebe. Every day. Emily would be proud too." "I know, Mom. You've changed the world, honey. Maybe not the whole world, but the part that matters." After the call, Phoebe sat by the window for a long time, thinking about how one decision, the decision not to remain silent, not to endure, not to hide, can change not only your life, but the lives of thousands of others. Emily's gone. That cannot be changed. But her death was not in vain if children across the country now know that they are not alone, that there are people willing to fight for them. At midnight, Phoebe finally went to bed, but before that, she did what she had done every evening for the past 2 years. She took a picture of Emily, kissed it, and whispered, "Good night, sister. Tomorrow I will fight for you again." And somewhere in the universe, in that place where there is no pain and fear, the 14-year-old girl with dreams of the future smiled and whispered back, "Good night, Phoebe. I love you, and I am prouder of you than you can imagine."